All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to shatter some pretty big assumptions you might have about who is actually protecting your health data. Because, when we think of medical privacy, usually one acronym jumps to mind right away: HIPAA. But the reality of how your data is treated today, well, it absolutely requires a new kind of guide to help us understand what's a legally protected secret and what is just a monetizable corporate asset.
You probably assume all your medical information is legally shielded. I mean, it makes sense. But the answer to this question, it might actually shock you. Look, we are generating way more biological data than ever before. But the legal boundaries that decide whether that data is considered a fiercely protected medical secret or just another corporate asset to be sold, they are incredibly rigid.
Section 1, the medical privacy myth. So where exactly is that boundary line between protected data and the absolute wild west of data collection?
Let's think about the device on your wrist right now. If you're wearing a heart monitor that was directly provided by your doctor, the data it collects is generally shielded by HIPAA, nice and safe. But if that exact same data, we're talking your heart rate, your sleep patterns, your oxygen levels, comes from a consumer smartwatch you just picked up at the store, well, that generally goes to a manufacturer completely outside of HIPAA scope. That consumer data is really only regulated by the Federal Trade Commission against deceptive practices. So it's the exact same biological data, but with totally different legal protections. Crazy, right? And this invisible boundary, it extends right into your web browser. Let's say you buy a book online about a rare form of cancer. That purchase is honestly only covered by the bookstore's own privacy policy, or maybe some state-specific laws, like the Reader Privacy Act in California. Or if you're repeatedly visiting a health website, asking questions about a specific disease, those site records are also highly likely to be completely outside the scope of HIPAA.
Moving on to Section 2, defining the covered entities. Because if all these apps and websites aren't protecting your data, we really need to know who actually is. So here's the deal. HIPAA really only protects your identifiable health information, often called PHI, when it is held by what the law specifically calls a covered entity. We are talking strictly about healthcare providers, health plans, and healthcare clearinghouses that process transactions electronically. In fact, if you go to a doctor who only accepts cash and absolutely refuses to use electronic billing, they might not even fall under this legal umbrella at all. But thankfully, the rules don't just magically stop at the doctor's office door. They also strictly bind the back end, what we call business associates. Look, a hospital can't just hand your sensitive data over to some third-party cloud server and wash its hands of the responsibility. No way. Under the HITECH Act, these billing companies, the cloud hosts, the claims processors, they are directly on the hook. They actually have to implement the exact same physical and technical safeguards as your very own doctor. All right, Section 3, enforcing the privacy rules. Having all these rules on paper is one thing, but let's take a look at what the OCR does when these entities actually fail to protect your information. So the Office for Civil Rights, or the OCR, basically acts as the enforcement hammer for the Department of Health and Human Services. And let me tell you, they carry a massive hammer. We're talking about the power to assess civil monetary penalties of up to roughly $2 million per year per type of violation. They are out there regularly auditing these entities. And the best part? They don't just go after the complex technical hacks. They go straight after these systemic, institutional failures to protect your privacy. Just to ground this in some reality for a second, back in 2018, the OCR hit the health insurance company Anthem with a record-breaking $16 million civil penalty following a massive cyber attack. $16 million! And that staggering penalty was handed down because the breach ended up exposing the electronic protected health information of almost 79 million people. It's just wild to think about. But here's the thing. The OCR doesn't only issue fines for these massive, headline-grabbing corporate breaches. Lately, they've been focusing really heavily on individual rights, too. They're actually issuing fines to hospitals that make a single patient wait months just to get a copy of their own medical records. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, empowering your patient rights. Because beyond all those big corporate penalties, this whole framework is really about empowering you. It's easy to feel small here, but you are definitely not powerless in this system. HIPAA actually guarantees your right to access your designated medical records and see exactly who has been viewing them. Plus, if you spot an error in there, you can legally request an amendment to get it fixed. And what if your doctor just refuses to change it? Well, you can actually file a formal statement of disagreement, and that document gets permanently attached to your file.
Now, all this modern bureaucracy, it's actually grounded in some incredibly deep history. These legal rights we just talked about, they really stem from a thousands of years old promise. Yep, the Hippocratic Oath. It's all about protecting the inner workings of our bodies and minds from public exposure. Because honestly, without that solid bedrock of trust, we simply wouldn't be honest with our doctors, would we?
Okay, final section. Section 5, protecting your genetic information. Let's zoom out a bit, because protecting your actual DNA, that is the real future frontier of health data. Identifying a disease you have right now is one thing, but what about identifying a disease you might get, say, 20 years from now? Because early genetic testing created some very real fears about discrimination, Congress actually passed GINA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, back in 2008. So let's say you have a genetic marker for a serious illness, but absolutely no symptoms have manifested yet. GINA is there to ensure your health insurer cannot suddenly hike your premiums. And it strictly forbids your employer from firing you or not hiring you just based on your DNA. But listen, you have to be incredibly careful here because there is a major loophole. Federal law provides a nice floor of minimum protection, right? But it does not stop life insurers or mortgage lenders or even schools from treating you less favorably based on your genetic info. Seriously, unless you live in a state with stricter local laws on the books, a life insurance company can entirely legally look at your genetic risk factors and just straight up deny you coverage. And hey, remember those at-home direct-to-consumer DNA tests like Ancestry or 23andMe? Well, unless it was specifically ordered by a doctor, that test sits completely outside the HIPAA boundary. And that is huge because by 2020, an estimated 20% of people in the US had taken one of these. All of that highly, highly sensitive data is basically just relying on a messy patchwork of state laws and some basic FTC rules against deceptive privacy policies. So, as all of this health data rapidly moves off your doctor's traditional clipboard and right onto your smartphone, those boundary lines of medical privacy, they are seriously blurring. As we all embrace the awesome convenience of health apps and wearables and at-home testing, you really have to stop and ask yourself, who actually holds the keys to your most sensitive biological data? And when it inevitably gets sold or breached, what is it really going to cost you?